And so we've made it to the Utah Hockey Club and Scouching's Prospect Pipeline Review Series. And what we're going to do in this show is take a look at the many prospects in Utah's system, group them into some tiers, and see how things look going into a new NHL season. But before we do that, I need to go over what a prospect means and what these tiers mean. A prospect is a player who's within 5 years of their first year of NHL draft eligibility, and they haven't been on an NHL roster for more than a season. In terms of the tiers, we start at a franchise level player, who are players that you definitely cannot live without, and you have them as long as you possibly can. You've got a core level player who you really like having on your team. They might not be that Sidney Crosby, but they are not far behind. You've got your depth group of players that are your second, third, fourth line guys that play 82 games and you really like having them in your lineup. They fill out roles, they play key important jobs. You just like having them around. And then you have your maybes category, which are guys who might get to that point at some point. They've got a lot of upside and a bit of risk, or they don't have a lot of upside and just might not have enough to get there, but it could be possible. And then you have everybody else. For the Utah Hockey Club, we're going to start in the core category with Tijia Ginla and Dmitry Simashev. I love these guys. I think Tijia Ginla is the perfect example of what Utah needs to be aiming for. He's got a lot of projectable traits to the NHL in a way that I think Utah really searches for. He's physical, he's got a great shot, he brings a lot to the table in a very well-rounded 200-foot style game that I think will make that team better, to say the least. Dmitry Simashev is a favorite of mine for a number of years. He's huge, he's hyper-mobile, he's got great defensive instincts, and I think is a player that is going to go to the NHL at some point and just eat minute after minute after minute after minute, even if he isn't the most important offensive player on your team. Down in the depth category, there are a few really interesting names here for me as well. They just drafted Cole Beaudoin, who I think could be a pretty good depth bottom six NHL forward. Daniil Boot is in here, who's really pushing that core level, but I think he does have a little bit of risk with regards to how much his offense is going to translate. But he had a really good year with Lokomotiv Yaroslavl this year, playing with Dmitry Simashev, and I would expect that to happen again. He's gigantic, he's skilled, he's got a great shot, there's lots to love. It seems like Josh Doan very well could be on the NHL team this season. I haven't been extremely blown away with him, but he has come along quite nicely, and in the last year of eligibility to be on this list, he could be an NHL player and belongs in this tier. And closing it out, we've got Maverick Lamoureux and Julian Lutz. Maverick Lamoureux has come quite a ways in his game. I'm still a little bit questioning of exactly what kind of an NHL role he'll play, but with his size and his skating ability, there's probably something he can do in the NHL and play some kind of role for Utah in the future. And I'm still a fan of Julian Lutz. He's still relatively young. It feels like he's a player who's been around a long time in my mind. But as an AHL rookie this year, I'm curious to see how he does, and I think there's a job for him in the NHL as a physical player at some point. We have Michael Hrabel in here, and Hrabel's a guy who has a lot of talent, but every time I've seen him in a situation where he has to make a save, it hasn't worked out in his favor. But that said, he had a really good freshman year with UMass, and I think that the talent level is enough to carve out an NHL role of some kind. In terms of the maybes, there are another group of interesting players here. You've got some high upside in Noel Nord and VT Väisänen, and I would argue Melker Thelin in net, who had a pretty good season at a pro level last year. They just might have a little bit more of a ways to go, but I'm interested in these players. Will Scahan, I think, could be a guy that fills out the bottom end of your roster. Again, you just leave him in college for a while, and we'll see where things go with those guys. It's an interesting group from the core tier down to here, and time will tell. And with that, we get down to the everyone else category, and this is where I think me and Utah feel just differently about young players, where I feel like they've had a lot of draft picks and they've just ended up down here a lot. I can't say these players are never going to make it to the NHL, but I do think that the road is just tough for them to drive good NHL results long term. I think if you wire your team to be extremely physical and mean and nasty, then yeah, a few of these guys could be in the NHL at some point. But in terms of overall impact, I still remain a little bit skeptical. A lot of these guys are on the older end of things and maybe look like a less and less likely player to be in the NHL one day, but we'll see what happens with this group. It's pretty big, but it is at the bottom of the pyramid, so it should be pretty big. And that said, they've still ended up with some really, really interesting players elsewhere in their system, and all things considered, I think Utah looks pretty well set up for some good players to enter the roster in the coming seasons. So that's it for the Utah Hockey Club. If you liked the video, you can like it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another one. If you really liked it, you can check out our website, scouching.ca, where a subscription gets you exclusive written content as well as access to data tables for prospects both in the NHL and around the world. Plenty of other cool stuff, like a Discord server on there as well, and you can check that out. So, with that, we're done with Utah, and in our next one, we're looking at the Florida Panthers.